I really want to emphasize, if you like VFX, if you are working in this industry, or if you're planning on going into this industry, this is a masterclass watching this thing. This thing shows, it's 2 hours and a half. It's the entire film, and you see the full breakdown of everything, even to the detail of watching how he picks multiple takes of one performance and merges it and blends it into one single shot.
This podcast is brought to you by Befores and Afters magazine. Befores and Afters magazine is the monthly print mag from VFX journalist Ian Fales. Go in-depth on key visual effects topics with major VFX supervisors, artists and studios. Each issue covers a different area like creature animation, miniatures, on-set VFX and VFX tools. Find your copy at beforesandafters.com/magazine.
This podcast is also brought to you by Hugo's Desk new compositing course. Join today to have access to 150 pre-recorded classes, 50 hours of training, using real production assets covering industry standard techniques with over 200 gigs of showreel material and access to a private Discord channel with over 2,300 students. This course is endorsed by Foundry and has access to a Foundry student license paid separately. Join today at hugosdesk.myshopify.com. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the VFX Notes Podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hi Ian, how you doing?
Good, really good. We are here with our episode about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, part of our season on the 2025 VFX Oscar nominees. And if you're only just catching our season, that's what we're doing now at VFX Notes, which is releasing seasons of the podcast. It's a really fun new thing we're doing, Hugo. I'm really enjoying it so far.
I'm enjoying it as well. And you guys don't even believe what we have up, in the pipeline. We have some really good ideas for some seasons. We are so excited about this. And it's funny how just by grouping them in 5 episodes, it makes all the difference with the team. So it's great. I'm really happy with this decision.
Yes, that's one new thing we're doing. The second thing is we've launched a Patreon for VFX Notes, all about, I guess, supporting VFX Notes, but also offering you guys bonus extra VFX things, including early access to episodes, bonus episodes, which you won't be able to get anywhere else, and bonus VFX content. Also a super fun thing we're doing, Hugo.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's gonna be great because we are gonna post every week something for you guys to see, which is gonna be exclusive. You won't find it anywhere else. You also have the audio version of the podcast as well, ad-free. And for those of you who don't know, the Patreon app is really good, actually, to listen to podcasts. It has its own player. You can download the audio and listen later. It behaves almost like a podcast app. So it's really cool for that. And so really check that out. And can't wait to talk to all of you. And also, thank you so much for our first Patreons that we already have. And thank you so much for supporting the show.
Yes. Check that out at patreon.com/VFX Notes. And you'll really see a ramping up of bonus material there. And we can't wait to share that with you guys. So thank you. All right. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes from Wes Ball. I need to tell everybody before we launch into this that for some crazy reason, Hugo had not seen any of the, I guess I would call it the reboot of the film series, which started with Rise of the Planet of the Apes from 2011. And I made Hugo watch all these films for this special Oscar episode. That's a big task, Hugo. But you did it, right?
I know.
You did it.
I did it. And I'm going to blow your mind even further. I've never watched the originals either. Never seen them. The only Planet of the Apes that I have ever seen is by far the worst, I'm told. I've went to the cinema to see Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. That was the only Planet of the Apes that I've ever watched before all this endeavor happened. But yeah, Ian forced me against my will to watch all these movies. And I have now watched all these movies, watched all 4 of them. in kind of almost in a row. I watched all 4 of them on a space of like a week or a week and a half or something like that. So it was a big, big moment of apes in my house, which was great. But yeah, what can I say? I was surprised, but I also wasn't surprised, and I don't know. Like I don't know, Ian. Should we just get started with that? Like, what do we think about this franchise? I guess that's what we're gonna go through.
Yeah, let's jump into it. I'm gonna say this. I have really, really enjoyed every film of the reboot, and part of it is these films have no business being any good.
Yeah.
Right? Partly because they're often pitched as these big summer adventure effects extravaganzas. But actually, I found each of them to have so much heart and to be quite personal stories. Now, let alone how fantastic the visual effects work is by Weta Effects. I mean, we will absolutely go into detail about how the fact that this company just exists almost to do these Apes films. Right. But as films, I've found them to be intriguing, great commentaries on the human condition, really interesting stories, compelling. I mean, the first 3 films and the way that we, follow Caesar, played by Andy Serkis, and then we feel terrible for the end of Caesar, right? It was, how do you do that with the CG character? It's hard.
Yeah.
And they did pull it off. And then we'll talk about this in a second, but to have another reboot and to have a slightly different new idea, I think is very clever. But as a series, I'm all in, Hugo. What about you, having just watched them?
You love the series, I know. You kept telling me that in joking that I haven't seen it, and so I've grown fond of them for sure. Having watched now all 4 of them, I can be brief about this. I think the first one is by far the best of all 4. I really loved the first film. And I think the first film is touching. It's sad about the human condition, like you say, about the species, about the environment and how you treat animals. I found the first film a really good film. I was really surprised by it. I thought it was amazing. The only little nitpick I have about the film is that I wish the film didn't have this big fight at the end. I thought the film could have been just like a nice, more quieter film. I feel like back in those days, every film had to have a third act with fighting, and I don't think it was necessarily needed, but the film is really outstanding. The first one is really lives up to still lives up, even though of course the CG is not as good as the new ones, of course, but still, man, looking back how old it is, I was blown away at how good it looks. Like it's really stunning, and I struggled a bit with the second and the third film. I think the films are good. I personally didn't like the direction they went to. I really loved the thing with the humans. I love the thing with the disease and the pandemic. I loved that. And it's so cool to see that now with the context of the pandemic we had. But I really love that, and I wanted to see more. And then I don't know, it kind of felt like they went to a more localized thing, just about Caesar and about his little world, and we kind of like lost track on the second film of the rest of the world, and I'm sure it's in purpose, but I wanted to see more. I wanted a different direction. And I think the third film is interesting as well. I found it a bit long. I think it's, in my personal opinion, don't get me wrong, I thought it was the weakest of all 4. For me personally, not in terms of CG, it's probably one of the strongest ones, and then the fourth film is a great breath of fresh air. I thought they came back with a banger. The film is fantastic. It's really good. It's not as good as the first one in my view, but I love that we kind of went back to the human side of things. We see the cities and see the grass taking over the world. It's set several centuries after. I love this kind of like almost religious connection with Caesar, where they know who he is, but it's almost like a Jesus figure. They only know parts of what happened, and they're just taking the pieces to try to reconstruct how the world is and where the humans are. And love the ending with them trying to communicate with the other humans. I can't wait to see the sequel. So I think they came back in strong force. So I think Wes Ball did a fantastic job. So overall, Ian, I wanted to thank you for telling me to watch this, because I would never in a million years would take the time to watch these movies. I don't know why. It's like you said, they have no right to be good. And when you look from the outside, bunch of apes walking around, it doesn't sound like it's going to be good. You kind of look at that.
No.
And so I never gave it the benefit of the doubt, and I just thought the films were bad. I don't think they are. I think all films are good. Of course, like I said, a bit uneven for my taste. But again, thank you for introducing me to this franchise. Yeah, so
I
love
should
the
say
first
this-
one, love the fourth one.
Yeah, I should say, I don't really mean they have no business being good, because the first Apes from the 60s is incredible, which you
Maybe I
haven't
should
seen,
watch
Hugo.
those as well. I've never
And
watched them.
it
But there's like
absolutely-
5 of them, aren't there? Is that like a bunch of them?
Well, there's
aren't
some bad sequels to that film,
Okay,
in my opinion. But they're all commentaries on humanity, right? And of course, the first one has that incredible twist with the Statue of Liberty. There's a great twist, really, in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes with the role of May and what she's trying to do and collect. And, instead of seeming to be like a scavenger, she's actually much more than that. I think that's what makes Kingdom really compelling. The characters in Kingdom are already great, the ape characters, but then May's twist is, I think, sort of this extra element that turns that film into something as good as the originals. But yeah, I just think they're a classic example of representing humanity and able to sort of be a window into what's going on in the world at this kind of time. But then on top of that, as a fun adventure, graphic, violent, kind of thing as well, they're fun popcorn films.
Yeah.
And that's why they have these third act battles, Hugo, obviously. And that's why they kind of, I think, work for all audiences, because they've done very well. These aren't niche films. They're summer blockbusters, effectively, that come out a bit earlier than summer. But, so I'm sort of a fan of the way that 20th Century Fox and then 20th Century Studios and ultimately Disney have made these films and committed to them. I think it's quite bold in the current climate to have these kind of off-kilter films, and they work. They work for me totally.
Yeah. And I must say that I think Wes Ball did a great job with the third act fighting on this film, because I think the fourth film, the fighting is really not really, it's not boring. It's not one of those heavy things that I think it's built so well that there's almost no final fight really. It's more about the flood, and then we're going to talk more about that later, but it doesn't feel like a big finale fighting. I feel the whole film is quite well balanced, and I find there's a lot of really cool themes on this, like the religion with Caesar's past, and also like the symbolism with the eggs and the of them with the eagles, almost like a bit like humans became attached with dogs and they are becoming attached with eagles. So it's almost like the story of humanity, like the humans on the prehistoric time became, from Cro-Magnon, then became humans as we know them now. And the apes are now passing the same phase. They're going through this phase of enlightenment, and they have eagles as pets. And it's really fascinating to see this struggle, and also fascinating to see the struggle with May. Like, there's a really cool part on the film at the end when she says, but this was ours. Like she turns to Noah and says, where is our space? This was all ours. And then, Noah says, well, what about the apes? Where were they? Because, they were in zoos and they were in cages. And so there was no equilibrium on that relationship. And you can kind of see that there is a painting. You can kind of see with the ending of the film when she retrieves that hard drive and then puts it on, the humans start communicating with the others. You can already see a tension going on there where the humans are going to try to reclaim the earth back to them, and the apes already have it. They have the kingdom now. And I'm sure there will be a fight here, of course, on the next film. But this is really universal themes, and this is really deep. This is super
but isn't
deep.
It? Yeah.
It's very deep.
And it's all very clever because as far as I can remember, the virus has actually made humans dumber, which is why they go into scavenger mode.
It's super well made. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other twist is, of course, she's gone and got this hard drive, but she can no longer go back into humanity because she is presumably infected by the virus. Yeah. So now I guess the insinuation is that she's part of the ape community.
Yeah.
It's all intertwining and clever, and
it is.
I certainly love that part of it.
And when you watch all 4 films, like I said, I think the first is outstanding. The fourth one is now outstanding. I feel like the 2 in the middle are absolutely necessary. Without them, you would not be here. We would not be where we are without seeing the whole story of Caesar. I just felt that they were not as good when I watched them at the time. And they were a bit slower, and they were focusing on things that were not important as these main themes. But having said that, without them, you can't be where you are now. And so, as a whole, as 4 films, it's stunning. It's amazing. It's really cool. It's probably, I don't know, man. I after watching all 4 of them, now I have the insight of thinking about the whole story as a whole, especially because I watched it all in a week and a half or 2. I think if you watch them all in a row like this, you get a lot of more perspective. And I think this is probably one of the best franchises right now, like existing right now.
I totally agree.
One, the most deeper one, and the most well made and well written and well directed,
and not stale at all. I'm hanging out for number 5.
Yeah,
right?
I can't. It's just a shame that it takes years for them to make one.
Yes,
it takes fucking years for them to make one. But I find it really fresh at these times to have something like this, and props to everyone involved. It was a fantastic film, and and I can't wait to talk more in detail because apart from all of this very inspired story and the amazing symbolism, this is, I'm gonna say it right now, this is the most good-looking movie in CG that I've ever seen in my life. It's the most photoreal thing I've ever experienced, and I've watched it in 4K in my house. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. This is the most real I've ever seen, to a point that even as a VFX artist, I completely forgot that we were watching a film that has CG.
That needs to be said. That needs to be said that we watch these films that have computer-generated characters, vehicles, environments all the time. We watch Avatar, which is essentially all computer-generated for many scenes, but also has live action. There is nothing like the Apes franchise that makes it, that is as I'm going to say it, is as perfect as this work. And there is something VFX is doing.
It's another level. It's
another level.
It's another level. And it's a travesty that they didn't win the Oscar yet. But I know why. Every year they have a film, there's always something bigger at the time.
Yes.
They had Gravity, they had Blade Runner. There's always something else huge at the time, which is it's bad luck. Maybe it's this year. But
maybe it's this year.
Maybe it's this year. But I feel that Veta and their team, I think they are the equivalent of ILM in the 80s. They are on a. This is another level. This film. This is what happens when you have huge resources being applied with good direction and good art direction, and you give the money to them, and they can make and thrive. This is what happens when you have good direction with good budgets and time, especially time. They had enough time to do it, and that's why it looks so good.
It's also, and we'll definitely get into it, but it's also a confluence of all the things that Weta is good at in one show,
in one film,
project, right? We're talking performance capture, translation of the performance capture, matching real plates, animation, rendering for water, like everything together. And then plate preparation is a huge thing that I hope we're going to get into as well, because I think that's a huge part of it as well.
And I don't want anyone to find my words. I don't want people to be offended by what I said about Veta. Obviously, I think it has to do with what type of film they're making. Obviously, we all know that DNEG is very good at certain things, and Framestore are very good at certain things, and they all have their speciality. But Veta is this, like, they are specials on doing this. Like, there is no one in the world that can do these apes and do this. Like, I just don't think there is, like, right now, at least, so no disrespect to all the other nominees and all the other artists involved. They're all also stunning work. It's just that this is this entire thing has been going on for what, like 15 years now? It's 15 years, right? It's an entire... We're watching a real-time process of a pipeline growing from 15 years ago to where we are now. This is like one singular pipeline that they're making for 15 years. And when you get to work for 15 years on something, it tends to become really good, because it's like a masterpiece.
Yes. And they absolutely, on the first film and the others, had great filmmakers to work with, which is Rupert Wyatt and Matt Reeves, as we know, incredible filmmaker. Here, Hugo, as we pivot to talk about the filmmaker, Wes Ball, a pretty amazing choice to make a high visual effects heavy film. And the reason is that Wes is himself a visual effects artist, who's certainly established himself as a great director too. I first got to know Wes through FX PhD, where he did a couple of courses, I think roto and sort of paint course. He made this short film Ruin, which everyone just couldn't believe was done by one person. And had
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was a teacher at FX PhD.
Yeah,
I had no idea. That's amazing. Really? That's amazing.
And then of course he's gone on to make the Maze Runner films, pretty good, and collaborated with Weta at least on one or two of those, and pretty good training ground for a director. He was meant to make this film called Mouse Guard, which was really interesting because it had CG characters and was using a lot of virtual production for previs and scouting planning. Mouse Guard didn't happen, but I believe he might be next on Zelda. If that's still happening. Yeah,
it is. He's still the director of The Legend of Zelda,
Yeah. And so, big shout out to Wes Ball here. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, and he's actually just a really nice guy as well.
Yeah. You see that on the documentaries on behind the scenes. Like, I can't wait to see Legend of Zelda with him. I love Zelda games, and I'm a huge fan of Nintendo and the Zelda games, and this is a really special collaboration because Nintendo, creator of Zelda, is involved in the project, which is great, which also is always like a good tick, but also Sony Pictures, the Sony branch of PlayStation Studios, is actually making the film with Nintendo, and this branch has been giving us really good films, Gran Turismo, and also of course Last of Us, and they've been really, and also Uncharted, they've been really successful with certain really cool films, and so I can't wait to see it because I think he's a great choice to do a film like that. This is going to be the first time we have like a proper live action version of Zelda, and I must say, like, having watched the Blu-ray and the extras, I really have to shout out to Wes Ball. I'm sure he's not going to listen to it, but if he does, I really hope he does. I can't thank him enough for crediting all the VFX teams and all the people on this project because
that's a big part of it.
The first time he said that, you start watching the documentary, there's like a 32-minute long documentary about the making of this film. if that you can watch on Disney Plus, or you can watch on the Blu-ray or DVD. But if you watch that documentary, the first thing he says is how good Veta is and how good the artists are and how good the CG is. It's the first thing he says, even before he's talking about himself, or even talking about the director, or even talking about the actors. It is the first time I've ever seen a documentary of a behind-the-scenes making-of, which has the actors, the directors, the producers, the set designers. It has everything, this documentary, including it has Eric, the VFX supervisor, as well. This is the first time I've seen the director just going right into it, like talking about the VFX. And this is a breath of fresh air, and we want to see more of this. Like I love him now. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think he's fantastic. Keep going, Wes. Like, this is the way to go. You know, I just feel that he gets it. He really gets it, and it's great to see. You know.
Yeah, and there's an interesting history of visual effects artists becoming directors.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes working out fantastically, and it's sometimes not working out, you know, and that's filmmaking. It's hard. And oh my God, there's so many reasons why some films get made and don't get made. But Wes is a filmmaker. And the fact that he has CG visual effects abilities and tendencies really helps with these kind of VFX heavy films.
Yeah.
His collaboration with Weta is also really exciting. And you mentioned Eric there. That's Eric Winquist, the visual effects supervisor. Previously on the other films, Dan Lemon was the VFX super Weta, and also obviously worked with Joe Letteri there. And he really established this pipeline we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
That Weta has used, but is also using on other films, including Avatar. You know, the workflow that they follow. But I just love the collaboration that Wes and Eric had here, alongside all the other craft makers and people that make the film.
Yeah. And I wanted to also really quickly let everyone know, if people are not aware of this, but for the like it's very rare that we get this kind of insight, but this film, the Blu-ray and also the Disney Plus version, has a raw cut of this film, and which means you can watch the entire movie side by side with the final pixels, and also side by side with the original mocap or the original footage. And so this is really insightful and very rare. I don't remember ever happening, except Sin City maybe, and maybe there's a few other examples, maybe people can tell me, but I really want to emphasize, if you like VFX, if you are working in this industry, or if you're planning on going into this industry, this is a masterclass watching this thing. This thing shows, it's 2 hours and a half, it's the entire film, and you see the full breakdown of everything, even to the detail of watching how he picks multiple takes of one performance and merges it and blends it into one single shot.
That's an important point to make, isn't it, Hugo, right up front? That Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is a performance capture film where the actors are wearing mocap suits on location, by the way, in Australia, right near where I'm sitting today. We'll talk about that as well. Yeah. But it isn't like they just go and film it and then they use those plates or motion capture as the film. They tinker with it. They reshoot some motion capture in New Zealand. They reshoot motion capture with some actors in stages once they've done the outdoor stuff.
All sorts of things.
Yes. And then the editor isn't told that they can only use that performance capture from one particular take. They take different takes, as you say.
Yeah.
They blend things. They move things around. And in this raw cut, which I have to say, Hugo, it is the single best thing in visual effects from 2024.
I know.
The film is amazing, but the raw cut is the single best thing that we get to see in visual effects from last year. I couldn't
stop watching it. I watched the whole thing, and I really want to tell everyone, stop what you're doing, stop this podcast and go and watch it. This is, if you remember when we were younger and we would learn filmmaking by watching extras and DVDs and things like that, this is your class. Like, this is 2 hours and a half of completely unobtainable information that you will never get. when I'm working in VFX, we always get the raw cuts, of course, because we're working. And I always look at them and think, I wish people would see this. I wish people would see this. And we got to see it. It is amazing. It's an archivist dream to see the process of the director, to see the process of the actors, to see what they picked, how they even make the shots together with pieces of different, because they have these split screens with multiple performance sometimes with those squares. And also it's a great insight to sometimes see that some shots are not even performed. There's quite a substantial amount of shots that are full CG and there's nothing there. No performance was recorded, no actor was there. It's just pure handmade animation from Veta, and it's like amazing to have that insight.
Yeah. The other thing to know is that, and by the way, this raw cut is actually titled Inside the Lens.
Yeah.
You can watch the film with the normal sound from the film, and this is split screen showing the raw footage and then the final. On the Blu-ray, I think the American Blu-ray, you can actually also experience it with an audio commentary from Wes, the editor Dan Zimmerman, and visual effects supervisor Eric Winquist. Now, I actually haven't seen it with the audio commentary because I could only watch it on Disney Plus in Australia, which is just the raw cut. Yeah. But I would love to watch the film again. Hearing from those three people would be super cool.
It's unrivaled access. It's that is my only negative thing I'm gonna say on this episode. I really am upset that they removed that from the UK release and from the European release. This was Wes. He really fought for this to happen. He really campaigned the studio for this to happen, for us to have a raw cut, because he wanted to show the amazing work that Veta did and all of the artists and filmmakers that were on this film. And he really managed to do it. And so the US release of the 4K Blu-ray has this cut, and including the commentary. But it's very specific. You have to get the 4K Blu-ray of the US market to see this. None of the other editions have it. And so, which is a shame. The UK version, the European version, all the other international versions have removed this cut entirely from the Blu-ray. It is really frustrating that they've removed it. And the commentary is missing on Disney Plus. It only is on the disc. And it's a shame because it's really bad because the studio, he convinced the studio and they managed to do it, and then they just botched it. Why didn't they release it on the entire world? I don't know why. Why didn't they do it?
We'll have to have perhaps a bonus Patreon episode, Hugo, about this sometime. To talk about DVD extras. Yeah, I really would love... I'm not going to spend more time talking about this. I just want people to go and watch, even if they can't watch the commentary, at least go and watch just the clip, just the version that is on Disney+. Guys, this is unrivaled access. Anyone wants to become a filmmaker, anyone wants to work on VFX, this is where you should start. This is the starting point to see what a modern pipeline does. This is just the best thing I've ever seen in the last 10 years. It's amazing. I totally agree. Obviously, by watching the raw cut, you not only see the result of Weta FX's great work, but you see the result of the amazing acting on stage and on location. You see the incredible cinematography. You see the great live action special effects work. You see production design. I mean, that's something that you tend to only get to read about and then kind of catch a glimpse of in some breakdowns. The raw cut lets you see all that work. And, for example, the cinematography there, Hugo, by, and I'm totally going to screw up the name, Galua Pados, who also worked with Wes on the Maze Runner films. Yeah. Let's just remember what we're doing here. We're shooting scenes and lighting them with a performer in there wearing performance capture suit and sometimes a HMC. And then pretty much all the time, we're also filming clean plates. Yeah. But we're filming clean plates with moving cameras, right? Yeah. And I'm pretty sure irregularly with any kind of motion control or technocrane setups, which
No,
would
yes,
sort of
this
let
is
you repeat the
this
moves.
is run and gun handheld
Yeah.
stuff. Like
So yes, any cinematographer who has to shoot VFX clean plates runs into this issue in the VFX shots for a film. Here, it's every shot of the film, essentially.
the whole film. Yeah, the entire film.
And yes, the team has had experience 4 films now, doing it, not necessarily the cinematographer. I just think it's, again, worth watching the raw cut, which doesn't always show the clean plate version, actually, because it clearly has the motion capture performance in there.
Yeah.
But just remember, that's what they're doing, essentially shooting the scenes twice.
Yeah.
And replicating the camera moves. It's a huge accomplishment.
By hand, yeah, which is, it's by hand, basically, almost on most locations. It's huge. And also you get to have this insight where you see what parts they actually kept and what parts they didn't keep. And it's fascinating you said about all the shots being VFX. Remember back in the day, in the 90s, where you would see a film and maybe you saw some behind the scenes with some raw cuts, and it would see... one of the shots would say CGI here. So one of the shots would say CGI here. And then you would have maybe another shot which has CGI. And maybe in the entire film, we would have 50 shots with CGI. And now on this raw cut, they label no CGI on the shots that have no CGI. And there's only 33 of them. And 13 of them are the same shot, so they're just cutting it. And so if you really count them, because it's just the camera staying there with the same shot, but they intercut with other plates, there's only 13 shots on this entire movie that have no CGI or no VFX or no cleanup whatsoever. Normally it's shots with her. Either she's taking the drive or she's like just in the background looking at like behind some trees, or it's usually just when she's on frame. But it's so funny that now we've reached the point where we are now labeling the ones that have no CGI. It's so funny.
On this film, it makes sense.
I know, it's so funny. It has this little label on the top, like no VFX. I was laughing so much.
Let me jump in there and just mention again that this film was shot in Australia. Yeah. So on location, but also at Disney Studios in Sydney. Really fascinatingly to me, they filmed part of the film 10 kilometers away, if that, from where I'm sitting right now, in a place called Helensburgh, and then up into the national park. There's a cave or a tunnel that is a centerpiece part of, where the apes don't go, but they do go this time, and that's actually a glowworm tunnel in a town called Helensburgh, which, is a bit of a tourist attraction. Then they also shot south of where I live in a place called Albion Park, and near Dapto. These are just towns near where I live. And during the raw cut, but also even during the final film, Hugo, I'm like, oh my God, that's blah, 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 And it's really, I just think they did such a stellar job of making it feel like it's in and around Los Angeles or California, essentially.
Yeah.
Every now and then there's probably almost way too many eucalyptus trees. But if you go to Los Angeles, there's quite a few gum trees, eucalyptus trees over in LA. They do grow well there. Yeah. So I think it's kind of justified. And then one particular...
reminds me of Portugal, because they have a lot of eucalyptus trees as well there. Which is funny.
Yeah. One particular scene... before the village is raided, Noah kind of goes out on his own and then sees the raiders. And then also when he's leaving the village, he goes past a very industrial area. That's a fascinating real location that they scanned and shot at, called Coal Cliff, which was where they basically process coal dug out of the mines. And when you catch the train to Sydney, you go through and past all those structures and buildings. So like every time I catch a train to Sydney, I'm like, this is where that scene took place. And it's fascinating. There's like coke ovens for how they process the coal there, which is, basically in the movie. So for me, it feels almost a little bit personal and, kind of like really
That's
fun.
so cool. That's so cool. I had no idea it was just next to you.
Yeah. I'm also going to say something else. I didn't tell Eric or the team from Weta this, but they shot this film at Disney Studios, which used to be called Fox Studios in Sydney. Now, that's right next to the visual effects and animation house Animalogic. One time, during the making of this film, I was visiting Animalogic, and the big stage door was open to one of these studios at Disney Studios, and I could see the Apes interior sets.
Oh, cool.
I believe it was, where they up on the sort of tower where the father is talking about his eagles and has his eagles, but also where they were filming inside Proximus's hideout was also there. And I remember seeing it and thinking, oh, should I take a photo? And of course I didn't. But yeah, so I like, funnily enough, sort of stumbled across this film a couple of different times. One other really interesting thing I just want to mention from like a nerd VFX point of view is that this film, as I say, was filmed on locations in and around here, but there was never any footage leaked that I saw of the actors in performance capture gear or anything like that. And I always thought that was really well done by production, or, maybe just well behaved by Australians for not taking any footage of these actors doing that work. They weren't in city areas, where people go by all the time, but they clearly must have had pretty good security on the sets to not have anything leak. So I just thought that was sort of worth mentioning as well. Yeah.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, apparently not good enough security, because you could have just taken a picture.
Well, you can't avoid walking past this big studio when you go to Animalogic, and usually the door is shut, but it was open. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know that you had such a connection with this. I had no idea that it was shot so close to your house and to your surroundings. Like, because you kind of see on the rock cut, you see actually houses in the back, and you see streets, and you see stuff really far away. You see city landscapes and things like that. You see stuff.
They also did film on the beaches of Sydney, and in a very well often used location that's I think an old quarry, that works for dirt and sand, and I believe some of the Mad Max films have shot pickups there or scenes there. So they did shoot in lots of different locations, but just happened to shoot in two separate places near Wollongong, where I am right now. So yeah,
cool.
It's really cool.
Now the cool thing about this is that when you were talking about the locations, the cool thing about the rocket insight that you get as well is how much or not they used of the plate, which is really cool, because sometimes it's of course full CG. Like when they're like going up to the eggs and to the basket, like that's all full CG, and sometimes it's half of it's CG. Like for example, the beaches where you see all the ships, that's all CG, but then the beach itself is real. But then sometimes, and it's really cool, I watched the raw cut and I stopped so many times and went back, and it took me like 5 hours to watch the whole raw cut because I was always stopping. Sometimes they have these pathways on the forest, and they just replace just the pathway, or just the trees next to it, or just the rock, or they just have these little sections that they replace. And it's so fascinating to watch and go through thinking about the decisions that they made. Like they, of course, replaced the pathway because the pathway was with the footsteps of humans, and of course with the mud. And you can't have footsteps of people with sneakers. You have to have apes walking. And so just that little thing, they have to fully replace the entire pathway where they're walking with the mud, with full CG mud, to match the foot of the apes. And there's this film, I really wanted to briefly talk about this, because everyone always talks about the apes. But there's so much visual effects on this movie because of the apes, of them hitting the foliage, or hitting a tree, or hitting some grass, or stepping on a puddle, or as soon as they step on puddles, the actors, they have to replace the whole floor. And there's so much invisible visual effects on this movie of just the surroundings where the apes touch or move or just press their foot or even on top of horses. Or there's so much invisible VFX, which is that alone is enough for an entire heavy VFX film. That is that entire side of the film, which is never discussed because everyone is just talking about the apes. I
think of all the things that I'm most fascinated by with this film, and there's many, it's apes on horses. So they have had to tackle that pretty much in each of the films. But just remember about, again, how they're accomplishing these sequences. Generally, if they're filming on a horse, they're filming a performance capture stunt performer or actor on a horse, right? So in a mocap suit with an HMC. So you need to put an ape in that place. Apes generally have smaller legs, different legs, smaller bodies, different kinds of bodies. So you're painting out where the motion capture actor was. You're putting back in bits of the plate. You're adding in the CG animated ape, of course. But then you've got to deal with saddles and stirrups.
Yeah.
And then you've got to decide, okay, should we actually just do a complete CG horse as well? Because it might be a faraway scene or an action scene. Weta effects does it all, depending on the shot. And what I'm getting at is, I just love that they go there, right? These films go there. Yeah. And the point is that it makes it feel realistic. When those apes are on horses, I am basically convinced that's what they shot. Apes on horses. It's almost conceivable. It's almost conceivable.
Because it's so real, you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And if you look at the raw cut, there's multiple shots where you see 3 horses and 3 people on mocap suits in top of horses. But there's also a lot of times where they just have one horse, one mocap, and then the other 2 horses are CG. And you're like, oh, those are CG. And you're like, wow, I didn't notice that because they're so intercut. There's several parts of the film where they have the 3 horses and then they just have 1. And then they have 3. And then they have 4. Yeah. And then when you're looking up at the film and then you look at the raw cut and you're like, oh, all 4 are CG. Oh, now in this shot, they're not anymore. Now there's 2 of them. Oh, there's 3 now. And it's just like, it's like a guessing game. You will never, ever notice which ones are CG and which ones are not CG. This is how good this work is. Like, I just, you can't even tell. And by the first 10 minutes where you're just blown away by the film, you don't even think about this shit ever again until the end of the movie when you see the credits rolling and you start saying, oh, there's like 2,000 people on this film. You don't even think about the CG or the VFX the entire movie, which is insane.
Yes. Well, we should probably talk about some of the tech now behind the film, Hugo. And a plug for befores and afters. You can certainly find coverage of this film and the previous ones by searching befores and afters. There's also a print magazine coming on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, so look out for that. I thought I would go into a little bit of detail about the evolution of the tech, Hugo, because as we say, this started with Rise in 2011. The main thing to talk about is how we're actually capturing the data of these performers. And, people who work in this industry will understand about shooting in a volume for motion capture, something done very much for games. It's very controllable in a volume, right? Like there's no weather. There's multiple takes is really not a problem. The boldness of the Apes films is that they go and do this out in the wild with crazy weather, dirt, mud, rain, whatever. When they first started, I think they were using something like 60 cameras to shoot only about 4 performers at a time. And they're using active markers to do it rather than optical ones. The second film, they upped the cameras to about 80, and they could get many more performers captured, something like 14. And the other thing is, in that second film, there's a bit more outdoor action, definitely rain, stuff like that. So the suits were made to be a bit more hardy and better for rugged, more rugged for that kind of performance. Then in the third film, which is War for the Planet of the Apes, they had 140 cameras. And by this time, they're all wireless cameras as well, which I think happened in the second film. And there is a lot more mud and dirt and snow, in this third film. Those films were shot in British Columbia, so we all know how kind of rugged that is. They're also using witness cameras, and they're also using head-mounted cameras, as we say. And the evolution in the tech has also been in whether to use one forward-facing, rear-facing camera, or to use stereo ones, or to not have them at all, because sometimes they do impact the performance, right? If you're close up with another actor,
you're hitting the
character.
cameras. You
So
hit against them.
They have different ways that they've been dealing with that. On this film, I think it's an evolution of what they'd done in those films, the original Apes, what they'd also developed for Avatar: The Way of Water. The other thing is they just, I don't know how to put it, but they just have so much more experience doing it, is perhaps a way that you could say, because Weta's history in performance capture goes way back, right?
Yeah.
It basically goes back to Gollum in Lord of the Rings films. And then we can trace that through to King Kong, certainly the Avatar films, now Apes, more Avatar, and pretty much every digital character will have some sort of capture that Weta facilitates, or, they're not always running the show. Sometimes the production is the one responsible for the capture, and Weta has amazing ingest tools to do that. But the body of work means that Weta has all this experience in tools that bring in the capture. Then they have teams who are basically motion editors, animators in their own right, dealing with that capture. Then they have tools that do it somewhat automagically. We're talking ML tools here. And then basically, I want to make sure that it's really clear that there's always an artist level on the animation, on the facial animation, on the body animation. Sometimes the performance capture is just a guide. Yeah. And we really want to reiterate that, don't we, Hugo? Because a lot of people think, oh, well, you just do the motion capture and it's basically there's the done. Performance. Yeah. Never, ever like that.
No, ever. No. And I think there's a huge misunderstanding about this in the general public, because they see these suits and they see the tracking markers, but because they never see like the two shots side by side or with enough resolution or proper breakdown of it, they just think it's just automatic and it's done. Watching the raw cut, you really can kind of see that there's quite a lot of moments where the animations take over, and other moments where the performance is there, and other moments is a mix of both. And there's no one trying to fight this over. It's just everything that is better for the shot. Obviously these actors are not monkeys, so they can't really become monkeys. And so obviously they can't really do everything a monkey can do, especially the bulging of the mouth and the way they move their lips. And there's just a limit of what they can achieve as a human, even moving and everything. And especially when you consider that there's a lot of shots where you have stuntmen performing the mocap. And so you can't really have the actor performing that. You have to have the stuntman. And then somehow Weta has magically found a way to inject the performance of the stature and the actual the posture of the actor into the stuntman's performance. So this is really complicated, and it's incredibly high-end and high-tech, and involves hand animation, and involves acting performance, it involves machine learning, it involves blend shapes, and involves the new types of things that they now use, not blend shapes, it's called deep shapes. And so this entire thing is practically rocket science. but it all kind of starts with the actor. It all starts with these really cool iteration that they've been doing with these cameras, these head-mounted cameras that they have on their heads. They're called machine vision cameras, which actually are stereoscopic pairs of cameras. This is the first time that they use. It's a stereo pair, which records at 48 frames per second, and so this is the beginning data where everything else then gets translated and gets moved. And I really, really think that people should really investigate a bit deeper about this, either read the article from Ian's website or just go deeper into their breakdowns. Or, in fact, there's even a few really complex and technical breakdowns on Veta's YouTube channel if you want to have a look at that. Because you really will start noticing that this is not as simple as just doing the mocap suit ever. As you, the audience, knows, I work a lot in games, and I've done a lot of mocap studio sessions. And man, we never just use what was captured, because it never really truly works. I mean, you get something, maybe sometimes you get 70%, sometimes you get 80%. If you're lucky, maybe you get 90%, but it's never really there. There's always, it's a bit, certain keyframes are a bit off, or it's a bit stiff, or the actor didn't really reach out the jump that he should have done, or you just have to add to that performance. It never is as simple as just, importing it into Maya. It's not going to work like that. And people that think that's how it works, they're very mistaken,
Yeah. I also want to make it clear that it's such a long history of this work from Weta Effects that has allowed them to become the experts in this. And a pivotal film actually is probably Gemini Man.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that film wasn't super successful for lots of different reasons. But, in Gemini Man, it was often a completely digital Will Smith. And I'm quite sure people forget that. And the slightly de-aged digital Will Smith as well. There's a couple of different Will Smiths in it. But on that film, Weta developed what's called a deep learning facial solver. Yeah. And that's what they used here, more to do like a QC, or to start the QC process for Apes. Now, on Avatar Way of Water, they had a different kind of machine learning approach for the faces. And that's for the character animation, facial animation. Now, that's because, obviously the actors look completely different from the Na'vi, and it was just a different approach. But here they were employing this deep learning facial solver for the apes, as well as all the hand animation, keyframe animation that we've been talking about. Now, there's a lot of other tech that Weta has developed for facial ingest, animation, motion editing, performance capture. I don't think we can go through all of it, but I'll put in the YouTube posting when we do this a few links to some stories I've written for Befores and Afters and Cartoon Brew and obviously the magazine. And Hugo, I just want to make it clear that what I'm really interested in is that there's this great evolution of technology that Weta Effects has developed. And part of that is about capture, part of it is about ingest and editing the motion capture. Part of it is about using new AI ML tools to, get somewhere quicker, more quickly. Weta kind of does it all and never rests on its laurels. There's always something new happening. They've sort of become the masters of this work, and that's why I think they're given the Apes franchise and make it possible
to do this. And I think it's fascinating and I really want everyone to think about I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's very difficult to explain, but this entire thing doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's so many parts for this, It all starts with the actors, but even before the actors are acting, they have to learn how to move like an ape. And
yes,
that's already a very important thing to emphasize. I think that's why I love these films, because these films are the complete merging of all types of productions in the film. Like you have CG, physical, acting, stunt coordinators. The whole thing is one melting pot to create this film, and there's no digital or physical or no CGI. There's nothing like this. This entire film is made by the collaboration of all these people. And shout out to the stunt coordinator, Glenn Sutter, which does an amazing job like teaching all these people how to move like apes, and that's the beginning part of all of it. And so they joke around calling it ape school, but it starts with that. They have to move like apes, they have to talk like apes and do the mouth thing. This all is, like Ian is saying, captured with this machine vision camera in stereo at 48 frames per second. Then this entire data kind of builds an entire 3D representation of the actor, like a point cloud mesh out of the tracking of the dots and the stereo rig, and also the witness cameras that they have around in the suit. So now, okay, you have the actor performing on inside your CG application, but this is a human performing, and so now you have to pick, and this is already very astonishing. They actually capture the human in CG. That's already difficult. That's already a difficult thing, to capture a full CG human into CG and have it with all the meshes and all the geometry and all the tracked, even with moving horses and jumping and debris and water and rain and snow and whatever the fuck the film has. So this is already very difficult. This entire thing is already, and we're not even in the beginning of becoming an ape. And so now they pick up this geometry and point cloud that they have from this motion capture information, and now they have somehow to translate it into an ape. This means the eyes are in different places, and the mouth is in different places, and the tongue is in different places. The teeth are different, the geometry, the proportions of the mouth are different, the proportions of the heads are different, the arms are longer, the legs are shorter. All of this needs to be basically translated. So all of the movement of the actor has to be translated to shorter members, bigger mouth. And this is done with the combination, like Ian was explaining, with machine learning to help, of course, but also a lot of hand animation. And once they're there, then there's an extra layer of realism that comes from all of the simulation on top, which we'll talk in a minute, but there's the simulation of the fur and the simulation of the wetness and the simulation of the dirt on the surface. And then there's also like the micro wrinkles on the mouth, on the corners of the mouth. And we're not even done yet. We haven't even reached shading, lighting, and texturing. We're still only on the animation. And so this is so complex, and such an astonishing job that everyone has done here. Everyone, from the set to the stuntmen, to the actors, to the CG artists, the supervisors. I don't think there's a film on earth that gathers so much, craftsmanship to make this, to make a photoreal ape.
Yes, it's impossible to talk about it all, because, as I keep saying, it's all come together.
Yeah.
To mean that Weta has it all. And another thing that I feel like Weta did much earlier on than even some other visual effects houses was, for digital characters, very much building from the inside out. Building the bones and muscles.
Oh yeah,
and
there's
fascia.
that as well.
Yeah. We just are so familiar with that as a thing now, and there are tools that have been developed.
It wasn't familiar at all. No.
So that's one thing. You mentioned the hair and fur. Now, in the past, Weta actually built their own tools for this. I think they used to be called Barbershop and fun names like that. Now they're generally using what's called Loki, which is their state machine, developed for Way of Water, and definitely was used for water simulation. But because it's a state machine, it can deal with other kinds of effects simulations. And so Loki was how they dealt with hair, fur, water in the fur, dirt in the fur, and things like that. Then there's the rendering. You mentioned shading and lighting.
It's funny that you were mentioning the anatomic rig, which is something new as well, which didn't happen before, where you have a full muscle system and you have an entire anatomically correct muscle system of the monkey. You even go as deep as having a full breathing system with the lungs and having them breathing. And
definitely,
so this, it just starts to add up and add up.
And Weta's been doing that for a long time, but it's all about building up these different tools that have enabled that.
And you were talking about the rendering, then you start talking about the pore skin, like the pores of the skin, and you start talking about melanin in the skin base color, and you're talking about the actual surface of the skin even before the hair is there, with the wrinkles and the texturing and the actual base skin color. It just starts to add up more and more, and then we haven't even talked about the eyes, and we haven't even talked about the fingers, and the whole thing just becomes It's
in case people are not aware, Weta FX also has their own proprietary renderer called Manuka, which is a physically based renderer, I think a spectral renderer that they developed themselves. Which means they control the rendering process. And, you don't need to look past this film, but there are many others where you can see Weta is on top of the game. One of the studios on top of its game with rendering, thanks to Manuka. I would say that of all the Apes films, Hugo, because this one, Kingdom, was shot very much outdoors in bright Australian light. I mean, there's plenty of dark scenes, and that's just part of the mood of the film. There is something about the way the apes look in this film that I felt was even more photorealistic than what I'd seen before.
Yeah.
That goes to rendering, but it also goes to a process Weta FX has developed in terms of capturing on-set lighting. And they actually call that their fizz light process. I am never going to try and explain what's involved in that. But, it is about shooting charts, balls, and much, much more different lighting setups that Weta has down to a T. I've got a bit of detail of that in some articles I've written. Fizz light has also been the subject to technical papers and presentations that Weta's done. So I'd look that up, fizz light, PHYS light. And get the details there. I think you'll be fascinated about how they approach it in a very, very systematic, physically based, plausible way. Yeah. And people on here will probably say, well, yeah, but we're all doing that. But there is something Weta FX is doing that is sort of above and beyond what others are to.
Yeah, it's true. They're all doing it. But I just feel that they are going deeper than most. That's what I think we're trying to like. This reminds me, like, when I saw an FMX presentation from War of the Planet of the Apes years ago. I haven't seen the film back then, but I saw the presentation, and I remember Weta explaining how they had the trees on the hillsides with the snow, and they actually didn't just model the trees; they grow the trees with aging. So they basically, the tree starts as a seed and starts to grow, becomes a young tree, then becomes an older tree and becomes a tree. So it's almost like, okay, should we model a tree or should we simulate a tree? And I think that's how Weta is doing visual effects. They're simulating. And I know everyone is doing, but I don't believe that everyone is doing it to the detail that they are making, because what you were just mentioning about the lighting and how the lighting looks good, and they have the HDRs and they have the lighting. Then there's like an entire section of compositing as well, where they are emulating the lens flares, basically recreating them with gizmos inside of Nuke, recreating an entire library of lenses, different anamorphic lenses. This film was filmed in anamorphic, and they try to mimic the actual properties of how light goes through glass. They're not inventing flares. They're physically simulating lighting through glass.
Yes. Yes, but that comes from, and this is probably obvious to many VFX people out there, not just making that up. They're measuring the way light goes through real lenses.
Yes,
right? And that's part of their fizz light process.
Exactly. And it has to also do the way the lens breathes, and the distortion is applied, and the redistortion is applied, and the end distortion is applied for tracking. These are what's happening on the Planet of the Apes and the majority of the big VFX movies, of course, is that these companies, Iveta and DNAG and a few bigger companies, only the big companies have the budget or the know-how in-house or even enough people to do something like this. These companies are now simulating real life. That's what they're doing. They're not just making up stuff that looks good. They're starting with a simulation, which is the real life, and then they manipulate it to make it look as the director wants. So obviously, we've all been there where we watch a CG movie and we think, that shot doesn't look very real. Because what happens is you simulate it and you make something, and then of course there's direction into it, and there's like the story has to happen, and so something has to happen to it, and so we move from the simulation into something else that is not a simulation anymore. But the level of detail, the technology to create Raka was developed over the span of years and years and years.
Yeah.
And that's just one example of one ape of the film. This is like technology that keeps evolving from film to film. This is often films are one thing. Like, DNAG has to do Dune, and they're doing Dune, and they have the crawler, and they have like the scene on Gideon Prime. Like, they have these shots that they have to make, and they only exist on that film, and they will never exist on another film. And so they don't have the time, or they never go even more deeper into it because they only do it for that film. This is like since 2011 we're making Apes, and so we're making them and creating, and Vet is just creating and it's spilling to other films as well, because they're doing other films with apes as well, and they're making other films with characters as well. This technology is fantastic because it's a pipeline, and it's completely it can be applied to other productions they have. They can apply it. It's really fascinating to see.
I agree. Also, what's interesting, in addition to that, which I think is absolutely, it informs the next film, they also work out whether some fancy new technology is necessary for a film. And in this case, we already mentioned Loki for fur and hair simulation that had been developed for Way of Water. But for the water in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, we're talking river water and rapids that didn't necessarily fit in with what had been done on Way of Water with the state machine there. So actually Weta went back to, this is for Kingdom, went back to their previous approaches for water simulation. I imagine that's more in Houdini, a sort of different approach, because they didn't need the Way of Water, right? That's, so, and I guess similar to, not necessarily using the brand spanking new machine learning animation tools that were used for Way of Water, but still using machine learning tools that had been developed for Gemini Man. So they pick and choose the right tools for the right job, and Kingdom was definitely a benefit. Kingdom definitely benefited from all that previous development, as we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's worth jumping into a few scenes, Hugo, that we sort of loved. There's almost too many in the film.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to do all of them, but we'll give it a go.
An early-ish scene is this raid on the village, and it happens at night. It's fiery. At one point, there's a really cool wanna, which I understand was much longer in the film, or maybe 30 seconds longer in the film, and it wasn't as long in the final film. The reason I love this raid is that, okay, once again, how do you film something and have all this fire and have it at night and then make it look so convincing? I still can't quite get around how they made it possible. And one thing that Eric Winquist told me is, well, in some ways, treat it like a normal visual effects shot in a film. What can the special effects supervisor, that's Rodney Burke, contribute in terms of gas lines and fire, that can be shot on for real? Again, how do you shoot the plates? How do you shoot clean plates? In particular, this sequence is really quite violent and daring and a bit shocking. And I think that really comes out in the film. What did you think about that raid on the village, Hugo?
Yeah, it was really beautiful and really well made and really huge in terms of scope. Like you're looking at this thing, and it's vertical. It goes up into these big structures there they are, and all these particles of fires, and this is really a big thing. Like there's there's horses and apes and fighting and explosions all over the place, and this was again made in a very structured way. They filmed as much as they could for real. They had light rigs, they had fire on set, they exploded things, and they had huts where they would film with the actors, where they had sections of the huts and sections of the trees and sections of the staircase going up, and then of course the rest was extended in CG. But this entire thing then becomes an amazing bedrock for the CG, because you have the real fires there to use as reference to then use Loki to do the fires in the first place, and then you can match and move, and then you can pick which part of the fire you keep and which part of the fire you add and which part of the fire you make really huge as well. In the middle of all this, you have like 300 animated, you have horses and apes and props, you have over 300 things going on this shot. So it's again, we've talked about, I know we are repeating certain things, but they are all together, like it is the only way of creating this film. And it's at nighttime, and you have all these lights, which means nighttime becomes more difficult because then the witness cameras don't catch the animations as well as they would if it was daytime. And then you have the cameras going all over the place. It's handheld, it's shaking a lot, it's wide angle, it's like moving all over the place. Apart from that, is also like an incredibly touching scene as well. It's a really beautiful scene as a scene of the film, because when I'm watching it, I'm not even thinking about any of this, and I only start thinking about this when I start reading your articles, or I start watching the raw cut, or I start really thinking and researching for this podcast, because when I saw it the first time, nothing came to mind.
No,
I was just watching the scene.
Yeah. The other thing to say about this attack on the village is that Eric mentioned to me that the cinematographer planned this out in a very detailed way in Unreal. Mm-hmm. Now, we've been touching on Unreal and that kind of previs and visualization for a couple of years now, Hugo, but I actually think it's basically becoming the process.
Yeah.
Right? Because clearly the cinematographer gets involved early, and they're able to use Unreal to not only stage scenes, to quickly iterate, but also light the scene, right? Yeah. And then Weta is able to ingest that in a very clean way that basically goes into their system, and then, shoot the plates using Unreal as the base, but then also use the Unreal scene to complete the final scene. So, I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but if you ever get a chance, listeners and viewers, to see what MPC did with Mufasa, they have basically incorporated, for such a heavy virtual cinematography project, Unreal into the process, right? Like it's basically make the film in Unreal, then do the final work in Maya and everything else. And every film I think we see now, Hugo, with many digital characters and environments, is going to have a game engine, Unreal side to it. And this is what's happening in Apes as well.
Well, it makes sense because it's the same way we were just discussing about how Weta is making a simulation on everything, on the water and on the grass and on the fire, and everything is a real life scientific approach simulation. Unreal is what that is. Unreal is a simulation. It's a game engine. A game engine is a simulation. Of course, Unreal is a much more simplified simulation because it has to run in real time and it has to run at 60 frames per second for games. So, of course, the explosions and fire and water and smoke and everything that is inside Unreal is a more simplified, low polygon, low resolution version, but it still has all of the rules of gravity and all of the rules of lighting and position of sun, position of all of those things still exist and can still be simulated to a point, to a very accurate degree. You can bring in the LiDAR scan, and you can have everything on scale. You can bring in the lens packages and have the sensor size. When you're framing, you're actually framing with the correct lens. All of those things can be simulated. Even depth of field can be simulated inside Unreal. Of course, it's not Final Picture. None of it is Final Picture because it's a game engine, but it looks pretty good. And it gives you like at least a starting point to then show it to everyone, and then everyone has a starting point. And not only is this a starting point, but I don't know if that happened on this film, but I've seen other directors and other VFX houses picking even the scene from Unreal and using it and exporting the cameras into another package and then continuing the work.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
happens all the time as well. So it makes sense on this world where we are simulating things to have a real simulator as like a simplified simulator that you can run on a laptop. You know, I think that's why Unreal has become such a part of the arsenal of the filmmaker, almost like when we in the 90s and 2000s, Photoshop became part of everything. This is now the reality we're living on. We have Unreal for everything now. And I think it's just going to continue more and more, you know.
Totally. Another sequence I think I'm obsessed with is when the Noah and Raka are now with May, and they happen to be in a creek bed which has a bit of water in it, but then there's a raid by Proximus's raiders, and this includes the scavenger humans. There's horses, there's zebras, you know, which is really cool. There was a shot in the trailer of Raka kind of running away, then turning back to camera. And I even must have tweeted Wes Ball, and I said, "You are never going to convince me that you didn't shoot this for real." Because in the trailer and in the final film, it is it's perfect. There is not much more to say than it's perfect. And part of it is, I think we just love Raka as a character. He's really funny in the film. His fur looks great. He's gangly. You know, he's really,
and the actor,
made.
He's so good.
The actor's
so
really
good.
cool.
He's so good. And I that's one of, I had a list here of negative things to say about the film. That is one negative I had on my list, which is, why don't we have more Raka on the film? Because I think he's so cool. He's like my favorite, and I was so sad when I saw him die on the film. But
that's Peter Macon or Mason.
Yeah, he's
awesome.
So good, isn't he? He's such a good. He has so much heart on that character. Jesus, and they really managed to transfer. You're watching Raka's performance, and you see him on the character. You completely see him there. But you know more about this than me, but because I haven't seen the original films, but I saw it on the behind the scenes that this is actually an homage to the original film, isn't it? This entire thing with the nets and the feral humans.
Yes.
And I even saw some side-by-side footage of the original film with this sequence as well.
Yeah, that's true. And it ends ultimately with the raiders trying to grab May in a final snatch. And that's a very, very tense, cool moment. It's probably one of my favorite bits of the raw cut, actually, because you have to it gets your head around how they even stage this, right? It's in long grass. There's a rock. How much are we going to do digital grass? How much are we going to shoot maybe a bit of blue screen to shoot May against the grass? How are we going to have the actors on the horses? How are we going to grab May? There's so many pieces to it, Hugo.
Yeah. But when you watch it, isn't it that it's everything you just said? They've used everything. You have the green screen, and you have the pieces which are real, and then they have entire sections which are simulations. With Loki, the entire grass is a simulation, especially that top view. And so that is the trailer sequence, isn't it? That is the sequence. Oh my God, that's a really good sequence. But I really love the sequence as well because of the zebras. It's a really nice surprise that it's just a funny scene. He's like, these horses have strikes. It's so funny. It's so funny because I've never seen a zebra. And shout out also to the entire team at Veta, where they've made these convincing animals all over the film. You know, there's eagles, CG eagles, there's CG zebras, there's CG horses. Pretty much every animal on this film is CG. And that alone is already an undertaking. Even the zebras look photoreal, and the shots, like when they are actually on the creek and you see the horsemen coming through, especially when you look at the rocket and you see May is in the middle there, and then the feral humans, and you see the Raka with his mocap suit, and then it all looks fine, but then you see all these splatters of water, and you see all these, and you see the netting, and you see the motion blur, and you see the camera shaking. How do you even track this? Like, how do you even bring in this to a CG application and track, let alone put the zebras in and put in the? It's really complicated. It's really and I know they have a lot of witness cameras and they have a lot of other things filming, which sometimes you see on the rocket. You see sometimes the tripods with the cameras on the back, and you see certain cameras there. And this entire thing has a lot of witness cameras, but it's a really, really well made scene. And again, I keep going back to the same thing. I say there is not a single moment during this scene that I even think that I'm watching a CG movie. I never think about this. I don't think I've ever experienced this on a film. Like, I don't think I've ever seen, from all these years we've been doing this podcast, I don't think I've watched a movie where I've never, in no moment of the film, I thought about the CG while I was watching it, because I am so convinced that it's real, what I'm watching. My eyes are so convinced that I'm watching a real thing that I'm not even thinking about it.
Well, they have so much screen time. That's one obvious reason for it, but also personality. That is what happens. It's the acting first. We've said it already. Wes says it. The other directors have said it. The visual effects artists take that on as well. It's a spectacle, but it's the acting first. And you can drive that home as much as you like, and you can say it, and yet sometimes these films become just big spectacles. Here, they're intimate moments, often with the characters, and that's what really
and those
works.
are my favorite shots, like the sequence where Raka is showing him the books and telling him about this is a language that we used to know how to read. That's one of my favorite shots. It's not even a spectacular shot in CG. It's just two apes talking. It's a very complex thing, of course, to make, but there's no action happening. There's no horses. There's no shooting. There's no dangerous thing happening. There's just two apes talking about books. But it's so intimate and so heartfelt and such a, I want to know more about that, and I want to know more about him. And it's just, it's really, really cool. It's really, the film is filled with these little moments, like when Noah is talking with the Proximus Caesar as well on the ship, and they're they're discussing and they're having food. There's all these little moments which are the most impressive moments of the film, because they are the most impressive. Of course, the fight, the action sequences are impressive, but these sequences are so intimate and they're so well acted and they're so convincing that's why I think they're my favorite, because we had glimpses of this on films earlier, of course. Even if you go back to Lord of the Rings, of course, in certain moments, Frodo was very realistic, and we could be convinced that Frodo was really a character.
Yeah,
but it was
I think
always
you mean Gollum.
Gollum, sorry, Frodo. I'm so sorry. So sometimes you would be convinced, oh yeah, that's real, but sometimes it would lose the magic, and it would be like a hit and miss. But now you don't. You just are completely engrossed into the story, believing that these are just apes that are talking. And I think that's an achievement on the film and the entire team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably most apparent, that subtlety in the effects, but also in an action moment when Raka dies at the river. I mean, this is a really emotional beat of the film, beautifully done. We're going to go into it in more detail, Hugo, in a special bonus Patreon video. at the VFX Notes Patreon. But just to say, this is really one of the standout moments in the film in terms of what was acquired from performance capture from the actor, and then Weta effects translating that into a raging rapid and a CG character underwater.
And what they filmed as well. There was a set as well, and
there's
a lot of things to talk about on that sense. I can't wait to go deeper into that with you. So guys, stay tuned onto Patreon and go and check it out there.
Maybe the other killer sequence in the film is that insane moment when they're in the vault and it's flooding and they're fighting and there's a lot of crazy camera moves and, as I say, water everywhere, and it's completely digital. They didn't build that set, and they didn't really film it in the same way that they filmed the rest of the film. They certainly shot motion capture of the actors just in a volume for it, but they did it in a different way, and I was kind of shocked that it was a sort of completely digital sequence.
Well, that's because by then you are so convinced of the whole thing, you don't even consider this. True. I only knew that it was CG because I saw the raw cut. I was like, oh, there wasn't anything there. Okay, so it's like you become like, oh shit, like they fooled me. I want to do this. Like, my favorite shot on that entire thing is when you have the water, a curtain of water, and you see the silhouette of the I can't remember his name, the really bad ape that's trying to kill Noah. And you just see a silhouette, and you see the transparent looseness on it, and he just crosses the curtain of water. Really beautiful shot that then, of course, ends him to his demise, which is also a really beautiful shot when he's getting drowned. But man, that shot is so inspired, so pretty, and so well made, and so well constructed, and it's slow as well. It stays there for you to watch it. It's really, really well made. How do I start with this? How do we start with this sequence? Because there's so many things going on. Here.
Well, I mean, I think because it's done a little bit differently, and as I say, they did certainly film elements of it, and they could sort of make a jungle gym type set to film some bits of it, because the point is that at some point they can reach up to piping and gantries and walkways. So they kind of built structures for motion capture, performance capture that allow for that.
The door of the outside, they had little bits of it and little sections.
For the whole Proximus's lair and the vault, ultimately, they definitely shot... there's actually amazing kind of outdoor photography of this set piece that they did build in different places. But for that flooding sequence in particular, Weta just had to go, all digital and...
it was
all the tools again.
It was impossible to really make it happen, because you would never, unless you would have done like Avatar, you would go into a volume of water, you would have gone to a pool, you wouldn't be able to float like that and really move and act through all that water, because it was rapids and it was water all over the place. But there's something special about this water, because I don't think I've seen such realistic water in a very, very, very long time. It's just the look of it, and the foam and the semi-transparency, the way the wetness touches the fur, and the little droplets that get left behind on the fur, and the little sections of fur that become completely glued together from the water, but then some others are like a bit more crazy because they are wet. It's really, really well made, and I don't think I was really blown away by the quality of the water that we saw here.
There's a related sequence when a couple of the apes are edging around the cliff face and get slammed by a wave. I think that is just like, is that like a real plate that was filmed somehow? Like, it's just, again, this film is kind of bowling us over, though we know
It turns out that it was and it wasn't. Like on that sequence that you're talking about, they have these huge dump water tanks that make these waves against the actors. But then when you see the breakdown, you could kind of see the breakdowns on the Visual Effects Society. There's this amazing breakdown for simulations that they've made. Hopefully it becomes part of the YouTube channel, because I noticed that one of the submissions of Visual Effects Society for Noah was uploaded to YouTube. Maybe the other ones will be uploaded as well. Hopefully they are. But the simulation one really shows that, where they have the hitting of the water from those huge tanks, but then Veta came in with Loki and kind of build another 50% of the plate with even more waves and more sprays, and they're all mixed together. They're like all of it. But I think it's fascinating, that sequence as well. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because it's also really beautiful, because it's nighttime. It's really also really pretty as well.
Yeah. That whole third act in Proximus's I keep saying lair, but it's basically his thing that he's built out of this ship and also surrounding the vault is a whole massive another visual effects challenge in terms of environments and set extensions, water sims for the ocean, but then water and explosion for the blowing up of the seawall. And then inside the vault for the flooding.
And then you have the flooding with all the objects from the outside. You have like all the little debris and the wood parts and the pieces of the outside set. And then also you have the tanks and you have the weapons and you have all these, all of them come through this simulation of water going through inside. And of course, let's not forget, there's like, I don't know how many apes going around here on this sequence. There's like apes inside the water, apes outside the water, apes climbing, apes not climbing, apes being sucked into the water. The whole thing is like just putting everything in the kitchen sink on top of the thing, like this entire sequence would be probably one of the most complex VFX sequences on a regular VFX film, just this part. But this is just the third act, just another one,
Yeah, well, as we said, we can't cover every sequence in the film, but we thought we'd just highlight a few ones. And please head to patreon.com/VFX Notes for a special discussion of Raka in the river. Hugo, that kind of ends our episode on Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. A special shout out to the VFX nominees for the Oscar, which is Eric Winquist, Stephen Unterfranz, Paul Story, and Rodney Burke. We wish them luck, and of course, luck to all the different nominees.
Yeah.
But it's been so much fun chatting to you about the film. Really appreciate it.
It has, it has been amazing. I'm really rooting for them, because I think all the nominees are amazing this year. But it's the fourth film. They never win it. They've lost 3 times. There's a world where I wish they get it this time, because I think they deserve an Oscar for this entire achievement over the last 15, 16 years. I just think it's like a career Oscar because it's such a long process to get where we are now.
Well, thanks for being part of this 2025 VFX Oscar season on VFX Notes. Hugo, always a pleasure.
Yeah, see you all later. Bye.